targeting big events that hard-working families will have saved up money to go to, and particularly for Eurovision. It's not our Eurovision, we're hosting it for Ukraine. I've met the head of Ukrainian Railways, and Putin is targeting the railways in Ukraine. Hundreds of railway workers in Ukraine have been killed, and I would have thought that the executive of rail unions in Britain would have wanted to show some solidarity and would protect events like Eurovision that we're hosting for Ukraine, rather than cynically targeting it.
First up, with the Transport Secretary Mark Harper, who joins us. Welcome to Sunday Morning.
Good morning.
Some very patriotic music in the background there. Let's start, shall we, with how people feel around the country right now, because that is going to play into how they will vote in these local elections. Mark Harper, you're the Transport Secretary. Are you disappointed that petrol stations still aren't passing on duty cuts and people are having to pay way more than they should?
Well, clearly I want petrol stations to pass on those duty cuts. We've obviously got my colleagues have got the Competition Markets Authority to look at how those duty cuts are passed on. I want to make sure that any savings in the price of oil are passed through to consumers as fast as possible, and I'd be very disappointed if that's not happening.
Well, how are you getting on with that review? Because fuel prices have fallen for the 5th straight month, but prices are still, really high. Diesel and petrol, for example, are exactly the same wholesale price, but diesel is often more than 20 pence more.
It is. Well, that review, I think, demonstrated that it is actually a very competitive market. But look, there's still a lot of pressure on the cost of oil and gas around the world, partly driven up obviously by the war in Ukraine. That's had a real impact on the cost of living. It has made it difficult for people. But you were talking about the local elections there, but there's a really important choice for people to make, and the evidence says that Conservative councils deliver you better services at lower levels of council tax for the average family, and that's why I would urge everybody to, where they are voting on Thursday in England, is to vote for their Conservative council candidate.
But you talk there about fluctuation in wholesale prices, but as I've just said, fuel prices have fallen for the 5th straight month. What are you doing right now to help people around the country who are facing huge bills to fill up their car?
Well, look, if you look at what fuel prices are on the forecourt, and I fill up my car just like everybody else does, they are significantly lower than they have been in the past. We are making sure that the market is competitive so that the wholesale prices on world markets are passed on to consumers. And as I think you mentioned in your question, at the budget, the Chancellor extended the fuel duty cut to make sure that we weren't taking any more tax from people. So I think that is important. The other thing we're doing, which is relevant not just for people filling up their cars, but of course the government's continued its energy package. The taxpayer is picking up around half of people's home energy bills, and that is an important mechanism for keeping the cost of living down for hard-working families across the country.
But I think the point here is that some of those retailers, those petrol retailers, are not passing on those reductions. But let's move on, because if people want to take the train instead of the car, that is also very difficult for them. There are more strikes planned over Eurovision, over the FA Cup final. Do you think those are cynically timed?
Yes, I do think they're cynically timed. Look, we made sure there were fair and reasonable pay offers made. The pay offer from Network Rail was put to RMT members, and they overwhelmingly accepted it. 90% turnout, 76% in favour. What is inexplicable is a similar value pay offer has been made to RMT members who work on the train operating companies, and for the third time they're not putting it to their members and allowing their members to decide. They're actually targeting big events that hard-working families will have saved up money to go to, and particularly for Eurovision. It's not our Eurovision, we're hosting it for Ukraine. I've met the head of Ukrainian Railways, and Putin is targeting the railways in Ukraine. Hundreds of railway workers in Ukraine have been killed, and I would have thought that the executive of rail unions in Britain would have wanted to show some solidarity and would protect events like Eurovision that we're hosting for Ukraine, rather than cynically targeting it. So look, I'd say to them, put the offer that's been made to you, which is fair and reasonable to your members, let your members decide, call off your strikes and stop targeting events which are aimed at supporting our friends and colleagues in Ukraine.
Have you reached out to them? Are you going to meet them to talk, to try and prevent these strikes from happening?
I've made it very clear that there is a fair and reasonable pay offer on the table. The rail minister's been meeting the unions frequently. That offer is on the table, and all they've got to do is agree to put it to their members. And as I said, when the similar value Network Rail offer was put to their members, RMT members voted for it with a big turnout, 90% and 76% in favour, which suggests that it is a fair and reasonable offer, and their executive should have the courage and the confidence to put it to their members, and that's what I would urge them to do.
Yeah.
And that would be the right thing to do for the travelling public.
I mean, the reason I ask you about reaching out for a meeting is because people might be listening to you and feeling a bit fed up. There are strikes on the trains, there are teacher strikes, there are nursing strikes, there are potentially junior doctor strikes too. There is a growing sense that things are just grinding to a halt here and that the government is just repeating the same thing over and over again. Is that enough, do you think?
But if I go back in my area, I met the rail union leaders when I was new in the job. I thought that was important. I've got a very productive working relationship with them, and Mick Lynch has said that himself. So I don't think that's the problem. I think it's about having them put those offers to their members. And on the health service side, you'll know that actually significant numbers of health workers, those that work for Unison, the GMB, have actually accepted the pay offer that's on the table, and the Secretary of State for Health is meeting all of the unions, I think on Tuesday, when the NHS Staff Council comes together to get their formal response to the pay offer. And he said today that he stands ready, subject to hearing from them on Tuesday, to implement that fair and reasonable pay offer, given that very significant numbers of people have voted in favour of it.
What's your message to teachers who are thinking about striking?
Well, I think my message to all public sector workers is the government's tried to balance delivering fair and reasonable pay offers to people, but those that are also affordable to taxpayers. And we recognise that things are difficult at the moment and there is a cost of living challenge. But what is really important to people across the country, for public sector workers as well, is that we halve inflation, we bear down on inflation, and we don't want to do anything that embeds higher levels of pay and higher levels of inflation, because that's actually not in anyone's interest. So there's a balance that has to be struck. We think we've got that right. As I said, in the health service, unions representing the largest unions members have accepted the pay deal. In my area, on Network Rail, RMT members have accepted the pay deal, and I would urge other unions to, where they haven't, put their deals to the members and call off unnecessary strikes which only damage the public.
The Coronation is coming up. Lots of people around the country will be looking forward to it, but there is significant concern that protesters from lots of different groups are going to use that opportunity to make a point. What's the government doing to ensure that protesters can't get onto the route? I mean, will there be searches? Are you using intelligence to target people ahead of time? What are you doing to protect the Coronation this coming weekend?
Well, as you can imagine, a lot of work has taken place across government to plan the Coronation, not just all the logistics, but also the necessary security. You wouldn't expect me to comment in detail on security matters, but across government, my department as well as others, we look at the intelligence picture, we look at where the threats are, and we will make sure that we are putting all the right systems in place to make sure that people are allowed to protest peacefully, but we obviously want to make sure that people don't break the law. And I think the Coronation is a fantastic opportunity, actually, for the country to come together to recognise this significant moment. It's going to be a big opportunity for the country. One of the things my department's doing is facilitating hundreds of dignitaries coming in from around the world. It's a real opportunity for Britain on the global stage to set out everything that we believe in, all of our values, and to actually put on a very good show for Their Majesties the King and the Queen Consort. And I think it's going to be a great weekend for the country, and I hope that no one tries to step in and damage it.
Do you think it's a good idea to get everyone to ask everyone to join in a Pledge of Allegiance? Could be rather divisive, couldn't it?
Well, look, people have a choice about whether they want to do it. Personally, I think it's a good idea. Of course, you'll know, both of you, that members of Parliament, we take an oath to the monarch ourselves, and in fact...
but that, in a sense, is the point, that the old oath was by people who were actively engaged in the process, members of Parliament. This is saying to everybody, join in, and a lot of people might disagree.
Well, look, we live in a free country, Adam. I think it's good to invite people to join in. People can do that if they want to. If people don't want to do, that's absolutely fine as well. But I think it's a good thing. The thing about the monarchy is, whereas politics, we're involved in debate and we argue about the issues of the day. Actually, the crown is a symbol actually of unity and bringing the country together. And I think the king stands above politics and the day-to-day debate, and I think actually it's a great opportunity for people to use that as an opportunity to bring the country together, and actually all the way the coronation is framed and all of the work that we've done, for example, in schools to teach children about our constitutional history and our future, I think is about bringing the country together, not driving it apart. And I think this is a good initiative, but look, we live in a free country and people are free not to take part as well as to take part as well.
Finally, government clearly trying to reset and move on from the troubles of Boris Johnson. Would it help if the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, were to move on?
No, look, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Secretary have a good working relationship. I see that myself. I think the government is getting on with doing the job. The Prime Minister, since he took over in October, is focused on getting things done. He set out his 5 priorities, and I think some significant achievements this year. Dealing with Brexit issues with the Windsor Framework, I think, was acknowledged to be a big deal, reset our relationship with our European partners. He's getting on with the job, and I hope people will recognise that on Thursday.